TV. Nobody cares.
People gotta need to know what you're doing.
All right, just pick some stuff out of there.
Kim Bondy is an award-winning television executive, writer, producer, and media strategist. She is the founder and president of the Bondy Group, a boutique media production, strategy, and executive training firm. She most recently served as the executive director of Katrina 5, Commemoration and Determination, where she produced a ceremony for the city of New Orleans, marking the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. She's also producing 2 documentaries, and her most recent lifestyle television development work includes projects for Cooking Light and Real Sample magazines. Until 2006, she served as vice president of the morning programming and executive producer of CNN's American Morning with Soledad O'Brien and Miles O'Brien. No relation. During her news career, Bondy led breaking news coverage of some of the biggest stories of the past 2 decades, including CNN's coverage of the 9/11 attacks, the Iraq War, and Hurricane Katrina. Before joining CNN, she was with NBC News, where she held executive and senior producing positions on the award-winning Today Show, Weekend Today, NBC News at Sunrise, and Nightly News Weekend Edition. Before joining NBC News in New York, she was the managing editor at WCAU-TV in Philadelphia, news director, reporter, and anchor at CITV and CITN in the Cayman Islands, and a news producer at WXIA in Atlanta. She began her career as a production assistant at WDSU, right here, Channel 6, in her hometown of New Orleans, and she's been featured in a number of publications, including the New York Times, Real Sample Magazine, Odyssey Courier, Travel, and the Times-Picayune. She's also most recently a visiting assistant professor at the greatest university in the world, the University of New Orleans, where she completed a Master's of Business Administration. What year did you complete that?
December of '09, last year.
December of '09. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Mass Communications from the university. She's a past fellow of the National Association of Minorities in Communications Executive Leadership Program at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. In 2009, she was named Distinguished Alumna of the Year. In 2006, she received the Mickey Leland Humanitarian Award from the Congressional Black Caucus. That same year, she was part of the CNN team that received a Distinguished Peabody Award for its Hurricane Katrina coverage. In August 2010, she received Delta Sigma Theta Sorority's Lillian Award for Communications. Are you a Delta?
They just like me.
And she served on a board of Ursuline Academy in New Orleans, the UNO Capital One Charter Schools, and the UNO International Alumni Association. Our guest today, Ms. Kim Bondy.
That was a lot. Thank you.
I would like to start at your business administration degree. Well, your master's in business administration degree. Why?
It was on my bucket list, truly.
Well, let's say you already had been up.
Yeah.
You already been at the top of your game, where most people assume they don't need to go.
Yeah.
They don't need to go to. It's not going to add any zeros to your
Right.
bottom line.
Yeah,
right?
I was there for me. I wasn't there because I thought that it was going to advance my career. It was something that I had been thinking about for a really long time, and I was really sort of inspired when I got a chance to do the fellowship at UCLA, being on that campus and being at the Anderson School of Management. I love the campus atmosphere. I think I could, be a college student for, the rest of my life. And when I was at CNN, I had this very big job that kind of ate my life. And I asked the CEO of the CNN networks during an executive training program that all senior managers have to go through, and at the end you're supposed to ask for something you want. Well, most people ask for more money, they ask for a better title, they ask for whatever, and I was thinking, well, they're not going to give me any more money. I'm fine with the title that I have. What I really want is to get my MBA. So when I asked, he said, well, why would you want to do that, asking the same question basically that Irvin's asking. And I said, you know what, I want to be on the I want to be on the profit side of the business. I want to know how you grow the business, how we run the business. I don't want to just be on the operating side, which is where you spend all of the money, where all the creatives live. Because if you really want to grow in a company, you better be a part of the money-making machine, not the money-spending machine. So, and he said, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. But I knew as soon as I left his office that there was no way, because every time I'd be sitting in a classroom, somebody would blow up something on the other side of the world, and there would go my, my school day. So when I left my job and moved back to New Orleans and rebuilt my house, and I had sort of this time on my hands. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get my EMBA and the executive track, Masters of Business. And I'm so glad that I did it, because I did it for all the right reasons, which was just that I wanted to do it for me. I didn't have any expectations about where the MBA would take me.
You've worked with what was not in your bio. You've worked with a lot of really well-known, visible people, and have assisted a lot of them in learning how to talk to the public. Public may be people, may be media, different kinds of things. Has that experience added some value to your perspective personally? I asked this because I know you only just recently went through some personal tutoring and that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I like it because I love talent, meaning I love to work with talented people. And, I do like 5 things well and like 100 things not so well. But one of the things that I actually do really well is I can find and scout good talent. And once I get that person's voice in my head, if I'm working with them, I'm always sort of about helping them elevate the game. Because as a producer, what you want is to tee it up so that talent can hit it out of the ballpark, right? Because you could work all day, all month on a project, and if they can't execute, it's sort of like you with writing music. You can write an opus, but if you can't help your musicians get there. And I know that there's some, trust and some, their interpretation and all of that. And it's the same thing for me. It's almost like sitting in a very similar seat. What you're trying to do is to give them a roadmap to succeed. And with that, you succeed.
Same thing for my expectation for students in this class.
Well, there you go.
So we've had a bunch of different speakers on different topics. You'll be the first person that, I guess, being kind of towards the middle of the semester, where be very interested to get a global perspective from you on a wide array of subjects that we have discussed. But primarily, I want to start with where you're from, which is?
New Orleans.
Okay, being a person from New Orleans, small town, going to a major corporation like CNN and being an executive producer, what's great about New Orleans, and what's bad about New Orleans?
There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. But I'll tell you from this perspective, one of the things, and having lived in many places, most of them bigger than New Orleans, and living outside of the country and working outside of the country, like when covering a war, for instance, people are always interested in New Orleans. And I'm not talking about post-Katrina New Orleans. People are interested in New Orleans. They know about us. I was once in Cuba shooting a pilot for a show that I wanted to do. And, we're on the side of a road outside of Pinal del Rio, and we stop at this little place, and there's this band playing, and, we're drinking beer and eating beans and rice and all of that, as only you can do in a place like Cuba. Like, you just kind of drive up, there's a whole party, but literally on the side of the road. And so in my bad Spanish and in their bad English, and I said, where are you from? New Orleans. Jazz. We love jazz. And then the band starts playing, they start playing, jazz, and but so people are always very interested in New Orleans, and they know that people from New Orleans. I say this. The gift that everyone here, most of you from New Orleans? Some of you from New Orleans? Who's not from New Orleans? Okay, a couple people not from New Orleans. The gift that we all got was the gift of charm. right? No matter where we go in the world or people who come here, we're charming. So I think that's one of the best things about this city is, it's truly the people. And I always say that our greatest export is our talent. So when we show up at places like a CNN or an NBC, people are automatically interested in you and they think you are interesting. And those are the two most important ingredients for success. Be interesting and be interested, because that'll make you curious, and then that way you'll go out and pursue great things and ask the right questions and that sort of thing. The bad side, I think we can be extremely parochial. I left New Orleans in 1992, and there are still people and a lot of thought that is exactly the same as it was in 1992. Some of that's good, but most of it's bad. I think it holds us back. We like what's comfortable. We also like inertia to some degree. It's part of what makes us great is that people are very relaxed. But at the end of the day, we're really not relaxed. It's just sort of we get caught in circling the drain around a lot of really important issues that have come to light in the last 5 years.
Let's talk about relationships. I like how you talked about that, and being interesting and being interested, which is kind of your relationship to things. This course, we've covered from architecture, we talked about BP, we've definitely vetted Katrina to some extent. We talked about the political landscape. We had a guy in from the African American Museum who was talking about doing an exhibit of DNA testing, all kinds of array of different things.
As it relates to crime?
Just as it relates to people in general. African Americans primarily would like to show up and have DNA tests done, and his question to the class was whether it should be done and whether it would be worthy of an exhibit. But a lot of different discussions about things around us. From you being a recent student, and you look at yourself like a lifelong student, what's the relationship you feel that the students should have to these things in life? How interested should they be in BP, in Fox News or CNN? How interested should they be in what's going on in paper on a daily basis? How interested should they be in the museums that are around, projects that are going on, versus, what are the things that they are doing in their daily lives of finishing college, going to work, whatever they have going on.
The pedestrian things that we all have to, go through. I think that it's critical to be a citizen of the world. One of the things that, that most of you have in here that I didn't have, and even Irvin to some degree, although he's a young guy, is you guys have so much access to information and things that are, you live in a really truly global society. My first job my first job outside of the country was pre-email, so you can imagine, living on an island in the middle of the Caribbean, and you lose touch with the world to some degree because there's no email. There was no, the internet was a baby and not, we didn't have access to that. So, I always say you guys should be, I expect that you come to the table ready and interested in a lot of things. And for me, that's an easy task because I like to get caught up in the excitement of whatever it is, whether it's, football or basketball, and even things that are a little pedestrian. Like, for instance, the thing that I was most fascinated with a couple of weeks ago was the Chile miners story, right? Not about the rescue itself, but what really happened in the hole. 69 days in the hole. Where did they go to the bathroom? Just the things that we would be thinking about, right? I would be so obsessed with where would I use the bathroom? Like, who set up the latrine, and where did they sleep, and how did they smell? And they're coming up through the hole and they're kissing people in the mouth, and I'm like, what do they smell like? But those are the things that sort of fascinate me in a weird way. I get caught up in the excitement of things that are in the zeitgeist, not necessarily things that I am just, sort of intrinsically interested in. I like to, capture what other people's excitement is and try to figure out what that means to us in New Orleans, what does that mean to us in the state of Louisiana, the United States, so on and so forth.
How do you think that if you were a student sitting in class today, how does that translate to you being successful? You know, you're finishing in engineering, or you're finishing in film, you're finishing in English. How does that translate to assisting you, adding value to your day-to-day life?
Because I think that if you are interested and you ask questions and you're curious, people are always intrigued by that. But also, too, what it does is, if you are also a risk taker, like I'll tell you a little bit of an aside, but this will get us where we're going. When I was 26, I was working in a local station in Atlanta, and a guy that worked at the station was leaving to go build this television station in the Cayman Islands. I'd never been to the Cayman Islands. I knew where it was vaguely. And I said to him without blinking an eye, "Take me with you." And he's like, "Why would you want to? You're in the 10th market. You're an up-and-coming producer. You know, why would you want to do that?" And I said, "Why wouldn't I want to do that?" I said, "Listen, here's the thing. I live with my parents. They bought me a car. I don't own any furniture. I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And if it really sucks, or if I suck at the job and you fire me, I come home, I go right back to my bedroom upstairs in my parents' house. Nobody gets hurt, right?" And it turned out to be the thing that people are most interested in my bio. You know, I don't always get asked necessarily about CNN. CNN's a close second. The Today Show's, you know, almost a distant third now. But people always point to the Cayman Islands. I got the job as a producer, a senior producer at NBC News, based on the fact that because everybody said, "You're a risk taker." But that was really because I was so curious. Now, that curiosity has led me down some not so great paths at times. But, you know, I always say, well, I think I'm going to die if I don't try that. I think it will kill me to not try that. And I think that as a student here at the University of New Orleans, you can easily translate that. If you are a person who's like that, if you're like-minded in that way, that it makes you say, I don't have to necessarily leave New Orleans to implement all of those things. You could be a risk taker, you could be interested in all of that and be in New Orleans, but it also makes you very curious about what the possibilities are, right?
So let's go through a range of subjects, and you kind of tell me where you are on these different topics. And we can start off with, Soledad O'Brien was our first guest, which is your best friend. We discussed a lot of the culture of communication right now in the world. She gave her view, which was pretty, I would say, polar different from Carville and Madeline when they came on where they stood at things, definitely politically. But we know going on right now, there are a lot of different news stations, right? Everybody's doing news. The Weather Channel seems to be doing news right now. What do you think the state of communications is globally in the world? Where is it at? And what's the role that you feel people, students, the world should be playing with communications? Is it good? Is it at the level you would be happy with? How can we make it better?
I feel a lot of ways about it. I'm actually torn about it. I love that there's a demand to own this thing, right? Because as a journalist, what you're taught is that you are working in the public interest, right? That you are the watchdog, that you are the, sometimes your job as a journalist is to watch and to report, in large part. But what I love is there's no more a culture of waiting for that news to come down the pike. People are now stakeholders in a real way, and they want to converse about that. Now, here's the danger in that, people blog about things and all of a sudden it ends up on the news, and that, it's not vetted as well as it should be. So I think what happened is like technology hasn't caught up with what's good or bad, or what's right or wrong, or that sort of thing. Technology is just there, and it's a fast-moving train. But I think everybody should have a voice, and we all live in media. I mean, there is no escaping it, and everybody now gets a say in that. Everybody gets a voice in that. So I think it's really critical, and it's been places around the world where it's been extremely impactful, like with the Iranian elections. The fact that people were able to, to blog about that and Facebook about it and all of that sort of stuff, which really brought that story to light to the rest of the world in a way that it never would have happened before. So you have to take the bad with the good,
The company known as British Petroleum, now just going by BP, we had the intergovernmental relations person, Carl Connor, here, and he shared with us. It's a little bit of a tense class, but where are you at with the BP, the whole BP crisis? Where are you at with it now? What do you think about it?
I think mostly that the work has just begun. You know, the fire is put out, but we all have third-degree burns, and our economy has third-degree burns. Our environment has third-degree burns, and there's a lot of healing that has to happen. But it's really so much bigger than BP. It's really about accountability and what was happening in that minerals department, which is now, the name's been changed, but I can't remember the name. But the idea that corporate America, corporate world, BP not being a US-based company, that they could have so much say. Somebody put it best, that it was like letting the murderer, putting him in charge of the crime scene. And the fact that they were giving approval and not giving approval to airspace, that they were working so closely hand in hand with the government, that it took a long time for there to be absolute, outrage. And what concerns me, and it concerned me the day that they capped the well, was that the story would go away, that people would stop paying attention to it. When I said that was just that we put the fire out, but we got a house that's been devastated in this thing, and we don't even know what the long-term effects are going to be of this. And I'm very concerned that there aren't enough, that we all get so exhausted by stories that once we think that it's okay, we want to turn away from it. And I think it's our jobs, everybody in here, to keep the pressure on. To make sure that that doesn't happen again, because you know what, it is going to happen again. And if you think about Valdez, and we were, 5 or 6 times worse than what happened with Valdez, that the idea that 20 years later you could go to Alaska and pick up a rock and there would be oil, so if they didn't right the wrongs of what happened there, and just as it related to cleanup, why do we even think? And this is a state, frankly, that people are a little exhausted. They're kind of tired of us. So they were ready to pull up stake and go away, because it was like Katrina, Gustav, BP, like, what's wrong with y'all? Like, are you guys, what's the hex on you guys? And we love it down here, but we're kind of tired of you guys. And so it's really up to us to sort of keep the pressure on.
We have a very important Tuesday coming up. I'm going to ask you what I asked Soledad, which was, is it true that Fox News they have their spin, which is towards one side? Is it true that CNN is towards another side? Mm-hmm. When you ask anybody who works at these stations, they say, no, we're just who we are and we report how we are. Do the stations have their own affiliations, political affiliations? So that'd be my first question about that. Second thing is, in terms of politics, just in general, in New Orleans, nationally, at the state level, what's your thought about, is it important? How involved should, the students here be, whatever your major is? How involved should you be? What's your stance on that?
I'll take the first one first. I will say this. I was a vice president at CNN for all 5 years that I was there. So I only say that to say I was exposed and part of all of the major planning for everything that CNN America did, the main CNN that you watch. There are 10 or 11 CNN channels, but the main domestic network, which is the mothership. There was never, ever a discussion that I was a part of where we had a conversation about being liberal or taking a liberal approach. Now, let me say this. Everyone in this room, everyone at CNN, anybody that's in media, everybody in the world, you see something through your prism. You cannot help it. You have a filter, you have things that you bring to the table. Most people, not everybody, but most people who work in news tend to be somewhere in the middle, but maybe a little more liberal than not. It kind of comes with, it's almost like what artists are, it's sort of that same thing in many ways. But we at CNN, and I will say this, fought really hard to just do the good journalism. Now, however that went into the prism and however it came out on the other side, you know, can be debated. There have been times when I look at some things that CNN has done and I'm like, wow, okay. Fox, I don't really know a whole lot about them. I don't watch them. I didn't watch them a whole lot when I was at CNN just because it's just sort of not my flavor of television. I would just prefer to sort of have the news, and I don't need people screaming at me, and you know, it's just not the way that I like to enjoy television, unless it's Real Housewives and I want everybody screaming. But you know, it's so that's the way I feel about that. I don't think that there is any conspiracy to, you know, be left-leaning or right-leaning. You know, you could look at the backgrounds of the people that run Fox, and a lot of your questions would be answered about the way that they cover news and who they appeal to, and how their money has been donated over the years and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, I'll leave that to you. The second part about it was about local and state politics. I voted already. You guys that can vote, anybody already voted? Got it out of the way. I'll tell you where my outrage is. That David Vitter ad over the illegal immigrants commercials. You guys know what I'm talking about? Which eventually they stopped running. And I could not understand why there wasn't more outrage over that. On a number of, first of all, it was just flat out racist, okay? And we should all be angry about that, whether you are Latino, Hispanic, black, white, wherever, you know, whatever it is that, you know, you are. We should all be, because it's actually really insulting, you know? The other thing was I thought it was really off the mark because of all the problems we have in the States, broken borders, like problem 99, right? I mean, there's so much other stuff that you could address in a commercial ad that I could not believe that, you know, that this was what was being, you know, actually put to us repeatedly. And it took a really long time for the local media to catch on to that story. I find that things are like, sometimes politics here is like a fast-moving train, and it's really hard to sometimes stop and say, what are the real issues here? You know, like, what's really at play? Do I really, like, is illegal immigration, which is an important issue, but we're not Arizona. You know, we're not California, we're not New Mexico. We have had our issues, but I promise you, there's so many other things that we should be worried about, you know, in Louisiana, and illegal immigration is very low on that list. So I love that there's a lot of discourse here about politics. I think that, you know, in listening to radio here, you hear a lot more of it than I've heard in any other city that I've ever lived in. But I also sometimes think we come down to who we like. We vote for who we like, you know, versus sort of really parsing through the important issues. And I would say this to you, those of you who are, you know, legal voting age and are going to vote next Tuesday, if you haven't, study on those amendments. There are 10 amendments. I had to go get the sample ballot. I had to sit down and really, because I also think that a lot of times that's sort of designed to confuse you and not be very clear about that. So do your homework before you go, because there are like 2 or 3 races and then 10 very wordy, legalese drawn amendments.
Architecture. We had Ken Schwartz, who is the Dean of the School of Architecture of Tulane. Wonderful guest who came down and actually showed us an impressive array of things that the School of Architecture at Tulane is working on as a part of kind of community engagement as a school. Several projects from work they're doing on O.C. Haley, things they're doing in different parts of the community. In the 9th Ward, he also discussed the process of how his students get to go out and actually build. Which is rare for a student in a School of Architecture. A lot of discourse has been created about outsiders, people coming in. We felt it with the Brad Pitt homes somewhat. Some people saying, who says these pink houses, you know, temporary or not, should be in place? Who says this is a good design? It's now gonna, who says we should redesign New Orleans, especially if it's somebody who's not from New Orleans? How involved should we be in the landscape of New Orleans? Is that something we pay enough attention to? And also not just the architecture of the buildings or a house or the shotgun, whether it's redone or not. How involved should we be in how many potholes we have in the city if we, you know, want Carrollton Avenue all the way to be completely redone, or Legion Fields on both sides to be paved. You know,
Right.
how important is this, and how involved should we be? Can we be involved? And also taking it from the perspective of, you know, you're in school, you got a job, you got things to do, you got a personal life, you know, okay, maybe I just need to replace the rim on my car versus worrying about, you know, these potholes, or whether this building works, or if the shotgun is going to be completely redefined. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it's interesting. I was having listening to a conversation last night at dinner, and Jacques Morial was one of those people, and we kind of started going down this very same road about, we just happened to be across from a building that he thought was, you know, just abominable. He's like, it ruins the landscape of New Orleans. No one should have ever built that building, you know, that sort of thing. And I was really fascinated by that, because I think that, you know, architecture, it's an opportunity for us to live amongst art, right? It's also an opportunity for us to live amongst culture. And I think that in New Orleans, we often take a lot of that, you know, for granted. Most of us don't, you know, sort of really understand or appreciate what a shotgun house is, and how the importance of that culturally. Saying that, nobody, Brad Pitt, Make It Right, they didn't go to the Lower Ninth Ward and like plow down a bunch of houses to build these houses, right? I mean, you know. So I think there was an opportunity there created to do something new and innovative. And at some point, the shotgun house was probably controversial. You know, the first time somebody built, why would you build a house where you open up the front door, you know, and I could just run straight to the back? That don't make no sense. You know, I'm sure that there was some, you know, uproar about that. And there always is. But I think, you know, what we have to look at is what created the change, what called for the demand of change. And I think that in a city like New Orleans, where we lost so much, there is room for that. I know that it's hard with all the things that we have to do, and all the things that you guys have to do, that it's hard to, you know, pay attention to a lot of these things. But when you really think about what architecture is, and the importance and the statement that it makes, and the long-term effects that it has, I mean, you know, if Irvin composes a piece of music, it doesn't live in the today so much as it lives in the tomorrow. And that's what architecture does. It lives in the tomorrow. What is that going to mean, you know, 50 years from now, or 75 years from now, or 150 years from now? You know, so I think that you can't just experience it in today. You have to think about sort of where it came from, and where it's leading us. And change is hard. You know, change is really, really hard.
The African American Museum in Treme is, you know, it's on Governor Nichols Street, and it's laid over a couple of different houses, a beautiful kind of main house. And the executive director is a guy named John Hankins, good friend of mine, and he visited the class. Well, actually, I was out of town, and he's constantly making people ask themselves two questions. First question is, are museums important? You know, and if they are important, why don't people take advantage of them more so? The second question is, who is the museum for? So if it's an African American museum, should African Americans visit it? Right. Can white Americans visit it? Should New Orleanians visit it, or is it for visitors? Who visits
the African American Museum primarily?
That's a very good question. That's a good question. I wouldn't want to say I have an idea of what I would think.
I think we're thinking the same thing.
But I'm not in the right position to say who I think visits it. But the real question would be, who should visit it? Should our students be visiting it? What's the museum experience? And once again, is it important? Okay, I'm getting an MBA, or I'm a business major, and I'm trying to go get a job. If I haven't visited a museum, or I went to one museum in 2 years, does it make a difference for who I want to be and what I want to do? So from the standpoint of someone like you, who actually has an MBA, had a great, wonderful job as an executive, doing all the types of things you're doing now with your new business, what's your perspective on it?
I think museums are about perspective. I think that's exactly what they're about. It's sort of like, how does what we're doing today fit into the bigger picture, right? It makes you stand still and sort of take something in as we are moving through life so fast, or to capture something that lends itself to where we're going. You know, I think museums are, I don't go enough, I will admit that. I think I went a lot more when I lived in New York, because it's such a culture of, New Orleans is a culture of museums as well, but there's something about when you live in your own hometown that you don't take advantage of it so much, and the museums in New York are so extremely high profile, and they do these really elaborate events, and they really do a great job of sort of marketing themselves and competing in that sort of thing. So I should pay closer attention, you know, to what's happening here in New Orleans, as a note to myself. But I think they're really about perspective. You know, I'm a big perspective person. You know, if I'm teaching a class, or if, you know, talking to students, or if I'm, you know, when I'm doing a news story, if I'm producing a show, I go, well, what does that really mean in the bigger picture? And that's what museums are about. What does it mean in the bigger picture? And it captures those moments in time. You know, like if you go to a museum that's, you know, a still photography museum, and you think about how a story can be told in something that was captured in a second. An entire story could be written, and paintings have been done that way. People could write, you'll be inspired, you probably have been inspired to write a piece of music about a photograph that was just literally 1 second of somebody's life. The one for the compilation.
Herman Leonard.
The Herman Leonard, right? So you were talking about the picture. Who was the musician, though? It was
Dexter
smoking.
Gordon.
Dexter Gordon. And what the impression that had, it was literally 1 second of Dexter Gordon's life. And you wrote a song. So it was really about storytelling and about perspective and sort of capturing something that was in a moment in time that continues to move forward.
We're going to have this session. We haven't had it yet, but we do it every semester, and it's going to be the Billboard 100. Mm-hmm. And we're going to listen to all of the, you know, top 10 hits in every category and see what the record industry, music industry thinks about our ears. Mm-hmm. So we'll go from country to R&B to hip-hop to whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And we'll try to do as much as we can get done, and then be very interested to get the students' response. What about music? You hear people talk about what they read all the time as being a real representation of who they are, right? Everybody knows, you look, if you walk in and look at a list of books or no books, mm-hmm. it says something about the person. At least this is an assumption I think most people would say about intelligent beings.
Right.
What about somebody's iPod? You know, what about...
Mine says, she's schizophrenic.
But what about listening to music? What about what people listen to on a daily basis? And when you turn on a radio, come on, you worked in communications. Yeah. What's going on with the radio right now? And how should they be investing or engaging with the radio and music and what it means?
You know, what I love about music is that, you know, again, it's sort of about perspective and where you were when you first heard that song or whatever. Like, my fascination this week is with Celia Cruz, right? And it was because I was leaving Bikram yoga on Monday morning, and I get in my car and NPR is on, and they're doing this piece.
That was awesome.
Wasn't it? It was. And I go home and I am all about Celia. Now, I had a lot of Celia Cruz music that I lost in Katrina, and I've, you know, like a lot of that music, and this was, I had an iPod, but it was an early generation iPod. You know, one of those, I don't know where my music is kind of thing. But what I think, you know, is important about listening to music and following music is not just about the way that it makes you feel, though, but the story that it tells. So, you know, when I was listening to Celia, I went on YouTube and I found some videos of her, and just sort of remembering her more from she only died in 2003, but just going back and looking at some of the live performances that had been recorded from like the 60s, and immediately it became a timeline, which is often what music does for me, because where was, you know, what influence did she have? Well, who did she influence? In my eyes, Patti LaBelle. You know, if Celia had on an orange dress, she had on an orange wig. If she had on a blue dress, she had on a blue wig. You know, and you think about, she was more than just, you know, a woman from Havana who moved to Fort Lee, New Jersey, and, you know, is the queen of salsa, but she was a style icon, right? So the impression that music has on and touches on all the other various parts of, you know, culture. But I also think it's sort of your orientation. I grew up in a house where we didn't have a living room. Now, I was born in 1965. I know, hard to tell. But, you know, and so my parents were very, very young. My father was heavy into rock music and into funk. So my orientation is pure funk music. I like if it's jazz, but it's funky. I like if it's rock and it's funky, you know. So I think that for me, that's sort of where my orientation comes from, you know, naturally. And I like to, you know, I'm not into music the way that Irvin would be into music, but Irvin's telling a story, and I'm a storyteller. So that's what I'm always looking for. You know, I didn't like country music for the longest until I sort of learned the value of the storytelling in country music. And then, but I liked the style icons of, you know, of country music. So I think it's less about just what's in your ear more than sort of what the other touch points are.
Well, I'm going to be very interested to, when we get to that course, to know how many people use iPods, by the way? Everybody. So, and how many people have programmed their own iPod? Or did somebody else program it for you? I mean, meaning that, did you pick your own music or somebody else picked your music? You're picking your own music, right? How many people listen to the radio? Okay.
Do you listen to music on the radio, or do you listen more to talk and news and both? Yeah.
91.5. Independent.
Is that too late?
Yes.
Trader.
Volunteers.
Have you ever swapped iPods with somebody for the day? Or swapped, like, on traveling with somebody and you both have your iPods and you swap iPods, not earbuds.
Would you be ashamed to swap your iPod with somebody? Maybe that's the project we need to come up with.
And come up with the story. Like if you swapped iPods with the person next to you, right? And you had to tell a story about that person. What does that person's iPod say about them?
Maybe we'll swap iPods during class. Yeah, we figure
I think
out
you'd learn a lot.
Yeah, we learn a lot about each other.
It's probably one of our most honest selves, right?
You know, I think there's a lot of investigation that needs to be done about that. And why I think it's important is people will say music is ancillary. Mm-hmm. But I think when people take so much time to put themselves on this playlist, I think has a lot.
And the order of the playlist.
Order of the playlist, songs they go to the most.
Right.
I just think
that's what you have to do. You have to go to the most recent, like you know what I mean, the most played songs. You have to go into that person's file and see what they're really listening to versus what's really loaded on their iPod.
So if Teach Me How to Dougie is the thing the person has is their most recent, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We have more restaurants in New Orleans now than we had pre-Katrina.
Yep.
We know what restaurants mean, and we had Steve Perry last semester talk about, who's the head of the all of the visitor experiences for New Orleans, talk about how important that is. And we always talk about restaurants as kind of important to New Orleans as an industry, but restaurants seem to be a lot more important in life now than ever before, considering the fact that there are two major food networks. There's all kind of food discussions. Pick up a magazine, it could be a magazine about anything, and then there's a food section of the magazine. How important is it to, you know, us entering the workforce, some of us already being in the workforce, but also being in a city where this is like such an important thing? What should our students be thinking about this? What's the perspective on the culinary industry right now?
I think what you're doing here is you're talking about one thing. We've talked about architecture, we've talked about politics, we've talked about a lot of things. We're really talking about experience, the experience. Food has become an experience, and music is an experience, and it's not just the food that's on the plate. It's now we're also better educated about food. We know a lot more. Top Chef, love it. Can't wait for Top Chef All-Stars, Top Chef Master Chef, whatever. And here's the thing. I'm a total food snob. I actually don't like a lot of things. We go out to dinner a lot. We have dinner and we talk, but that's really not, we probably spend I don't even know if we've ever talked about the food that's on the plate. You know what I mean? I think
That's true.
but it's an experience. It's really about.
We talk about dessert.
We talk about the dessert, right? But that's really about it. But it's really the culinary experience. It's less about what's on the plate. But now that we're also educated about it, now New Orleans is a little different, right? Because it's the Trinity, and we all have to talk about. I love when you talked about this in a documentary about, you can have an intellectual discussion about gumbo, and everybody's going to have a different take on what's good gumbo. But I think here in New Orleans that it's changing a lot. It used to be, before Katrina, I'll say this, when I would come home to visit, and I just did not like New Orleans food. I thought it was heavy and beaten up, and we had gone so over the top, like we were just trying so hard to prove ourselves, It's a piece of fish with crab and crawfish with a béarnaise sauce, and on top of angel hair pasta with a side of mashed potatoes, and the mashed potatoes have to have this in it, and topped with caviar. It's like, whoa. When you go to Italy and you go to Greece, it's like a piece of fish on the plate. They bring some vegetables on the side, and it's the best piece of fish you've ever had in your life because, but here it's almost like we're trying to hide or mask everything. I mean, if you go to a Thai restaurant here, or you go to sushi with a fried crawfish roll, our imprint has been so heavy. Now, a Besh or somebody like that could have a Susan Spicer would, they would throw me out.
Besh is coming, by the way. I'll let him know what you think about this food.
But let me say this. After the storm, when chefs had to go back into their kitchen, I actually did a piece for CNN about that. The food was so much better because they had to go in, working with a lot less resources, just food-wise and staff-wise, and they had to think differently about the culinary experience. And we didn't have a lot of tourists in town. You had a lot of people, a lot of money coming through the city, but it was really sort of workaday people who were here with the FBI and the ATF and building stuff and this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, they just want a big, heavy meal. But we were really starting to think about what does food culturally truly mean to New Orleans. One of the things that I love about food in New Orleans is that it is important and that men here cook, and that makes it really good for a single girl because, for me, cooking food means I'm going to Whole Foods to the prepared food section, and I'm going to buy 4 or 5 things, and I'm going to get home and put a few of them on a plate, and that's me cooking, right? But in New Orleans, my father would have literally. You couldn't eat because he'd had to tell you everything he did. Now, I know you only like, so what I did was, now, I had to let that cook. And yesterday I went in and I marinated, but then, I turned it over every hour. You'd be like, can we eat now? But I love that about him because he took pride in it. And I think we, no matter what part of the city you come from, what socioeconomic strata you're in, there is a pride about food, and I think that's born out of a culture of people not having money, because if you could share food with people, that was the most honest and giving thing that you could do. It comes from the heart, and I think a good plate of food and a good culinary experience is really about evoking all of that,
Are you familiar with my word association?
Oh my goodness. Let's go.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Ray Nagin.
Idiot.
Mitch Landrieu.
We'll see.
Rush Limbaugh.
Drug addict.
Soledad O'Brien.
Smart, hardworking.
Anderson Cooper.
Smart, hardworking.
Fox News.
Interesting.
CNN.
Loud. No, loud.
Okay. CNN.
Important.
University of New Orleans.
Value.
Local media.
Terrible.
What is your favorite word?
Fuck.
What is your least favorite word?
Juicy. Followed only by moist.
I'm going to have a juicy bird. I don't want that bird. It's juicy. Juicy? Okay. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Enthusiasm.
What turns you off?
Lack of enthusiasm.
What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck.
What sound or noise do you love?
Heartbeat.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The phone ringing.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Rock star.
What profession would you like not to do?
Office worker.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome to the Cayman Islands.
All right, we have time for 5 questions. Let's go. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering,
Tell me your name.
I'm Katie.
Hi, Katie.
Hello. Oh, okay. I was wondering what you thought, because we covered the question about media and its responsibility. And if you had any suggestions, like besides just being able to take the good with the bad, that since it seems like news is supposed to be like independent organization, whereas like politics is government, is the people, so it's like more straightforward to be able to hold them accountable or get results. And how would you suggest maybe like, or have any thoughts on what can like people do to keep their own news team, I guess, like accountable, or besides just maybe, I don't know, calling in or something, or?
I think that it's imperative. It's a very important question that you're asking, because it's all about accountability and having a voice and not just letting things go by. You know, whether it's you know, I love what the kid at LSU did with, you know, Bobby Jindal. I thought, you know, ask the important questions. Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, you know. And I think sometimes that there's so much media out there that we take things at face value and sort of really questioning why that is. And that could be a letter to the editor. It could be, everybody's reachable now. I blow up news people here all the time. And it was so funny, they Google me and then they're like, well, coming from a person like you, I'm like, nope, just a citizen, taxpayer, voter, you know, viewer. You know, I'm not bringing CNN into I'm just looking at what you did and here's some feedback, good, bad, whatever. But I think that, you know, when you are producing things, I used to say this all the time from the control room, that I would often feel like people would say, I watch, like I once went on Soledad and I had an interview with Robert De Niro, who I love, and he talked about something we had done on the show that morning. And I was like, you watch our show? I thought I was producing a show for like the people in the control room and my parents, right? You know, and I think sometimes people who work in news, in media in general, aren't often, we're the worst people at it because we all breathe the same air. We're all sort of in the same stratosphere. You know, we make about the same kind of money, same level of education. You know, if you're in New York, it's really myopic. And it's not the real world. I would say, like, you know, like people in New York live in a bubble, and so that's where most of your media comes from. But even locally, I think people who work in news, they hang out with people that work in news. They drink together. They marry each other. They have affairs with each other. They, you know, it's so incestuous that there's no room, enough room for outside opinion and thought and the impression that the work that you're putting out there has on the community. So I think pushing back to express your outrage and to sometimes say, hey, great job, because then it says, do more of that, you know. So I think that kind of feedback in today is really critical and very easy to do.
Question number 2. Yes, ma'am.
I kind of have 2 questions in one. One was, I really like how you talk about to be interesting and to be interested. How did you manage your time and like being interested in a bunch of different things, but still focusing and finding like a true sense of self so that you could, you know, accomplish something as opposed to just kind of, you know, spinning off into different directions? And also the example of the iPod as using it to tell a story, like in the class. For example, what if someone had never touched or used an iPod at all? So then maybe they couldn't participate and their story wouldn't be told, would that be their fault for not complying with what everyone else is doing, or how would that story still be told, or should we be forced to comply with what everyone else is?
Absolutely not, because that makes you not interesting, right? Because if you're just going along for the ride. But to answer your first question about that, I told you I only do like 5 things well, so that made it pretty easy for me to narrow the field. I'm bossy. I like information. And it sort of just really got very, very narrow and felt good. I walked into a television station here in New Orleans, and there was a pot of women banging away, smoking cigarettes back when you could smoke in a building, and they were smoking and using the fuck word left and right. And I was like, what do they do? They're like, oh, that's the pot of producers. I was like, I'm a producer. I knew immediately that I was a producer. And I always loved storytelling. You know, part of my background was actually in theater. Theater is all about, you know, storytelling. So I knew I wanted to be a part of, you know, something that involved, you know, storytelling and forward movement and information, right? So it was very easy once I knew and defined that. I was lucky in that way, you know. And it doesn't mean that I wasn't interested in a bunch of other things, but you know, and I trusted it. I just sort of wholly trusted that if I worked really hard at it, that I could be successful at it, right? I never doubted that, and I just happened to be true enough to myself in that, because, trust me, there were a lot of distractions along the way. I mean, I came of age in the early '80s. I should be in rehab or like on a corner somewhere, or, you know, but there was just something about me that just said, this is right, do this, keep doing this. But I don't think, to the iPod question, that you should absolutely not conform to anything. And, you know, I mean, and Irvin will sort out what that really is. But I think it's an interesting, you know, because it could be that we go to your house and look through your LPs. And what story does that tell? It's less about the mechanism, you know, and more about what the story is there, you know.
Question number 3.
What are the 2 documentaries that you're working on?
One of them is about this gentleman right here, and the other one is, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. It's based off of the you know, Irvin's story and the opus that he wrote on Elysian Fields. And we wanted to follow him through that journey. We wanted to document that process. I thought it all started with the story about Irvin's father. Irvin and I both had close ties to Elysian Fields. I live on Elysian Fields, so, you know, it was sort of, I was already kind of there as it related to Elysian Fields. But I just thought, I love the idea of pulling back the layers of the onion and seeing, how does that happen? How do they put that together? Whether it's shoemaking or whatever. Like, you put shoes on every day, but have you ever seen anybody make a shoe? You know, like really design a shoe and make it and cut the leather and stretch it and all of that sort of thing. You know, we take a lot of things for granted, take music for granted. So I thought that he was an interesting person, and I thought that he was interested in a lot of things that were outside of music. So we are on this journey together to tell this story. And what will come out of it, we don't know, because that's what doing a documentary is really about. It's about letting the action happen in front of you and recording it. The other one is really much more of an in-house documentary. After Katrina, I became really close with the sheriff of St. Bernard Parish, a guy named Sheriff Jack Stevens, and who's literally one of the most fascinating people I've ever met in my life. I didn't even know anything about St. Bernard Parish. I knew who Chalmette was because I used to go watch wrestling as a child, and he had Randazzo's Bakery. Full stop. That's all I knew about St. Bernard Parish. But in getting to know them, they had such an amazing story to tell about Katrina. I mean, they flooded levee to levee. I mean, there were like 5 houses not flooded. Every deputy on the police department lost everything they had. And the stories are really fascinating. And so it's really more for them. It's more time capsule for them than it is about anything else. But I'm really pleased about it. I spent a lot of time on it in the last week, re-editing the initial cut, because it's done narration, strong narration, where it's all just them telling their stories, all the deputies. And so we'll see what happens, you know.
Question number 4. Right behind, last row.
Aside from your various work arenas, What area or item have you found most interesting in your adult life?
Wow.
It would be in bad taste to talk about me right now.
Aside from your favorite words.
Yeah, which actually has nothing to do with that other part of the word. It's just when you work in news, I can throw that word around 1,000 different ways, you know, and it just gets to the point. I'll tell you the thing that outside of my work that has shown up in my work is that I love to travel and to discover and to experience other cultures. And I'm full in. I'm the girl who goes, you know, I'll go someplace by myself and, you know, I'll be at a resort or something like that because I need some sense of grounding. And I'm the one who ends up in the kitchen with the people because I want to eat like they eat. I'm like, I don't want no more resort food. What y'all eat? You know, I went to Indonesia, went to Bali, and people kept trying to do the tourism thing with me, and I'm like, where the real people at? Take me to somebody's house. I wanna experience all of that, why they do what they do, how they think of us, and at the end of the day, all roads kind of lead back to me being, a news producer or a journalist or whatever. I don't really do the J thing so well. I always say that I'm a producer. I'm a consumer and a producer more than I am a journalist. But probably the thing that gets closest to me is traveling and experiencing new things, new people. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Last question.
Nothing from this side of the room. You in the red and white shirt.
Well, I was just kind of thinking
What's your
about
name?
Nick.
Hi, Nick.
Hey. I was thinking about, like, we were talking about politicians and such, and David Vitters. Do you think that there needs to be more of a personal accountability of these politicians to say, not put that out there like that?
And I'm surprised. Yes, and I'm surprised that it wasn't caught earlier. But I think this midterm election is so nasty. I don't know about you guys. I cannot wait till Wednesday morning. I want it over. It's so nasty and not about issues, right? I don't, Tea Party, Republican, Democrat, whatever you are, fine by me. I'm not anything. I'm actually non-declared. I can't even vote in a lot of the primaries, because I just refuse to, join the party, a party. But I think that what we should pressure them to do is to talk about the issues and not about why should I not vote for Mélenchon or why I should not do this because he took a post-Katrina vacation and whatever. When I saw the commercial about that, I was like, damn, we all needed a post-Katrina vacation. I don't know if I'm so mad at him about that. Now let's talk about his voting record, but talk about your own voting record. You're the junior senator from the state. You've had that job for 6 years. What have you done? Speak on your record. And I think we don't challenge that enough, and we get caught up into what's sexy and what's hot, which is to, beat up your opponent. And I see the draw why you would want to do that if you're going to be in, if you're going to be in a knockdown, drag-out fight. But it's sort of up to us as the voters to, sort of say, talk to me about your record. Don't talk to me about what he, how he spent his time,
So a couple of things. One thing, I'm adding one other assignment to your blogs this week. And it is for you guys to tell me what my job is at a meeting that I have to go catch a plane for right now in Washington, D.C. It's called the National Endowment of Arts. You need to figure out what I do with it and what we're going to do for you over these next 2 days. So I want you to blog about that. That will be separate from your blogging about and along with Ms. Bondy here. The other thing is I'm going to need some volunteers on November 16th where we're doing a reception at my house for Soledad O'Brien and her new book. A book signing party, so if anybody's interested in helping out, see Stephanie so we can add you to the list to give you something to do. And finally, let's thank our guest today, the awesome Kim Bondy.
Oh, thank you.
All right, see y'all next week.
I'm going to see